In June of 1967, at the age of 17, Joni Eareckson Tada took a reckless dive into the Chesapeake Bay, and her neck was broken, and from her shoulders down was paralyzed without use of her arms or her legs. In the next 2 years, a very difficult time of rehabilitation, Joni learned to draw with a pencil and then a paintbrush in her mouth. And then exciting things on top of that began to happen. She wrote 2 books, one called Joni, her own story, then A Step Further. A movie version of her life called Joni was produced by Worldwide Pictures. We had the privilege of producing that film. Then she founded an organization called Joni and Friends, which is reaching out and helping churches to know how they can help to encourage and minister to handicapped people, people who are physically impaired in one way or another. And then another exciting thing happened. A year and a half ago, she met a man who was to become her husband. And tonight, for the first time in our crusade, we have Joni and her husband Ken, Mr. and Mrs. Ken Tada, with us in the crusade. Let's welcome them right over here.
Thank you, Cliff.
Ken, of course, I've had a little insight because I've talked with you, but you got a special smile on your face tonight. I'd like to know, first of all, we'd like to know, how in the world did you meet? And tell us about the first dates you had. That really would be interesting. Would you do that? We're glad to have you.
I think that's a question that many people have asked us about our first date. And I just want to say how excited we are to be here tonight. And Lord has just blessed us in our marriage. But our first date was interesting. Our paths seemed to, Joni's and my paths seemed to cross many times. We met at our church that we attend in Southern California. And at one of the social functions, I had an opportunity to talk with Joni and asked her if she might want to go out to dinner sometime.
I was shocked. I was so excited.
So she accepted, and I teach physical education in a high school down in Southern California. And that whole week I worked out in the weight room because I knew that I was literally going to have to lift her into those cars. Either that or we were going to have chaperones on our first date.
Little did he realize when he would be picking me up for a date, he'd be picking me up for a date. But it makes me sound like I'm so heavy. I'm not that heavy.
No, my wife is not heavy. I want to stand corrected on that. She's just not real light.
But you know, after that first date, there were many more dates, and our friendship grew leaps and bounds because it was centered around our mutual love for the Lord Jesus Christ. And then came that day when Ken asked me to marry him. And boy, I thought I was shocked when he asked me for the first date. But we had a lot of questions.
We sure did. And one of the things, of course, for us, you know, we weren't really sure what was going to happen in a marriage with a disabled person and an able-bodied person. A lot of people said, well, maybe you ought to experiment a little bit.
Or live together.
Yeah, but you know, I think the thing that Joni and I both believe, for us to have a Christ-centered relationship, and perhaps, you know, just, well, we know a Christ-centered marriage, that that does not give us any excuse to sin.
Right. I mean, why in the world should a disability give any of us time off from obeying God? You know, why should our inconveniences or our suffering or affliction give us an excuse to sin? Of course not. So our honeymoon, we had a lot of questions answered.
Now, we had a very interesting honeymoon. I learned a lot, and I'm still learning.
But you know, I think the biggest thing that Ken and I have learned is that God's power shows up best in weakness. And a disability is used by God to strengthen a marriage commitment.
And I think, too, John, just to share with the folks, you know, our situation might be a little bit different than others. When we go to bed at night, you know, Ephesians 4:26 says, let not the sun go down on your anger. And we just can't let the sun go down on our anger because, you know, in some marriages that I've heard, You know, the husband can go in another room and
or the
storm off the bed.
wife can stomp off to the bed early and you know, pull the covers around her shoulders and shrug her back on her husband and snore away before he even comes to bed, but we can't do that. You know, I just can't walk out of the room and, you know, here's the man who has to take off my makeup and comb my hair out. How can you stay mad at somebody when they're doing all that stuff for you? So in a way, God uses my disability to force us to communicate, to press us to be more open. But there's some other ways that we feel that my disability strengthens our sense of commitment. And that is this. My disability means that we've got a lot of needs, right? And when you have needs as great as we have them with this handicap, it forces us to go constantly back to Jesus for each and every one of those needs.
And, you know, it's grace, God's grace is so amazing because we, you know, don't look a week, 2 weeks down the line. But for Joni and I, we're really convinced that we ask for God's grace on a day-to-day, hour-to-hour basis. And because of that, you know, He's just teaching us all the time.
And you know, constantly, Christ is reminding us that He is the center of our commitment. And yes, we have a great many needs, and yes, this disability makes it difficult at times, but we keep going back to Jesus, who gives meaning behind our commitment.
I think, too, John, of all the years that I've coached football in high school, and the times out there on that field with those kids, and the one phrase that we usually tell the kids before a ball game, you know, where there's no pain, there's no gain. And there's going to be a little pain. But through that, Christ can just work some beautiful miracles in our lives and continue to just be the focus of our marriage and help us to grow.
And you know, Paul said that he had learned to be content. He knew the meaning of commitment. And that's what Ken and I are learning, that love is a choice you make each and every day when you wake up in the morning. You know, he goes off to work in the morning to school, and I'm kind of still in bed waiting for my attendant or a friend to come and get me up, and he'll sing a song to me, or he'll whisper a prayer in my ear. What a great way to start the day off together with Christ at the center of it all. Learning to be content means making some pretty important choices about your marriage each and every day. But you know, commitment centered around Christ can be meaningful in every person's life. You don't have to be married. You could be single. You could be divorced or widowed. No matter what kind of relationship you have, a friendship with your children, commitment means you hang in there when the going gets tough, and you allow God to take whatever weakness He's given you and make it become the very reason that your relationship with either your husband, your wife, or your friends, or your children has strength. Jesus is the meaning behind commitment, right?
Right.
God bless you all. And thanks so much for listening.
Thank you very much.